The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a place where the fate of entire worlds was decided. Its walls, made of black crystal, shimmered under the light of distant suns. Alien leaders from hundreds of planets sat in a wide circle, their glowing eyes fixed on the center platform. Every seat was filled. The air was heavy, like the silence before a storm. Today, the Council had only one matter to discuss: humanity. In the center of the hall, a tall, silver-skinned alien rose to speak. His long fingers curled around a staff, the golden symbol of the Council's authority. His voice echoed across the chamber, translated instantly into dozens of languages. "People of Earth," he said, his tone calm but sharp like a blade, "you have grown too bold. You have traded among the stars without permission. You have ignored our laws, and now you will kneel." Across the galaxy, billions watched this broadcast. On giant screens in Earth cities, people stood frozen, listening. Children clutched their parents' hands. Soldiers stood in silence. In crowded marketplaces, shopkeepers stopped their work to stare at the Council's message. The alien leader's eyes burned with cold light. "You will pay tribute. You will send half of your resources to the Council. Your fleets will be disarmed. Your worlds will be open to our inspection. You have 7 days to agree, refuse, and you will be made to obey." A deep murmur ran through the hall. Other alien leaders nodded in approval. To them, humanity was just another young race, reckless, defiant, dangerous. Better to crush them now before they became a real threat. On Earth, the broadcast cut to the United Earth Assembly, a chamber of glass and steel high above the clouds. Inside, the leaders of humanity sat around a long table. Some looked fearful, others furious. The president of Earth, a woman named Elena Voss, kept her hands flat on the table. Her face showed nothing. "They want us to kneel," said one of the ministers, his voice shaking. "If we refuse, they will attack. We are not ready for a war of this scale." "They think we are weak," another leader said, leaning forward. "They think we will surrender without a fight." President Voss spoke for the first time, her voice low but steady. "The Council has never faced a race like ours. We have survived worse than threats. We have endured worse than fear. But if we choose war, it will cost us dearly. We must be ready for what follows." Far away, on a small military outpost orbiting Mars, Captain Mara stood at the viewing deck, watching the red planet spin below. She had fought in the border skirmishes with alien raiders years ago. She knew the Council's fleets, their power, their speed, their cruelty. She also knew that if the Council demanded humanity kneel, they would never stop there. The Council did not just take tribute. They took freedom. A voice crackled over the comms. "Captain Mara, secure channel from Earth Command." She stepped into the comms room and activated the link. The image of President Voss appeared, her face drawn but determined. "Mara," Voss said, "you've seen the Council's message." "Yes, Madam President," Mara replied. "And I know what it means. I need you to prepare, quietly. No one beyond your crew can know yet. If we choose to fight, you will be part of our first move. Can you do that?" Mara's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am. We won't kneel." The transmission ended. Mara stood alone in the dim light, her reflection staring back from the black glass. She thought of Earth, the blue oceans, the green forests, the cities glowing at night. She thought of the faces of her crew, young men and women who had never seen real war. If the Council came, they would. Back in the Council's grand hall, the alien leader raised his staff again. 7 days, he said. The clock begins now. And with that, the chamber's lights dimmed, signaling the end of the session. The alien leaders rose and filed out, their long robes sweeping the floor. But in the shadows above the hall, a small drone hovered, invisible to alien eyes. It was human, and it was recording everything. On Earth, that secret footage reached the president's desk within hours. It showed more than the broadcast. It captured the private whispers of the alien leaders after the session. "They will kneel." One alien said. "They always kneel. All young races do." "And if they resist?" another asked. The council speaker's voice was cold. "Then we will burn their worlds, one by one." President Voss replayed the words 3 times. Her hand curled into a fist. That night, the lights in the assembly building burned until dawn. Military commanders came and went. Scientists arrived carrying secret designs. Ships began leaving the dockyards under sealed orders. The people of Earth were told nothing, not yet. But rumors began to spread. In bars and markets, in schools and factories, the whispers grew. "The council wants us to kneel." On the 7th floor of an apartment block in New Berlin, a young mechanic named Daniel leaned out his window and shouted, "To the street below, we will never kneel." A cheer rose from the crowd. Others began repeating the words. By morning, the phrase had spread across half the planet. In the deserts of Australia, a group of retired pilots dusted off their old starfighters. In the icy north of Europa Colony, miners began melting down spare metal for weapons. Across the far colonies, messages spread. "Prepare. The Council is coming." And on the edge of human space, Captain Mara stood at the bridge of her ship, Ironheart, watching the stars. She knew that in just a few days, those stars would burn with war. Far above them all, the Council's fleets were already moving. The clock was ticking. Humanity had always been told when to bow. Through history, empires had risen to crush them, kings had ordered them to submit, and tyrants had demanded their loyalty. Each time, humanity had faced a choice: bend or fight. More often than not, they had chosen to fight. In the early days of space exploration, when the first alien traders arrived, they came not with gifts, but with demands. They saw Earth as a primitive blue world, rich in resources and naive in politics. But they had underestimated the stubbornness of its people. Earth remembered the ancient wars of independence, the revolutions, and the desperate last stands that had shaped them. Those stories had been passed down for generations, carried in books, songs, and whispered legends. Now, as the Council's threat echoed through the galaxy, those old stories began to stir again in the hearts of men and women. Captain Mara had grown up on such tales. Her grandfather had been a pilot in the early defense fleets, the ones hastily built when humanity first clashed with alien raiders along the outer trade routes. He had told her of the battles fought in the shadows of gas giants, of ships held together by nothing but hope and scrap metal, of comrades lost to the darkness of space. She had listened wide-eyed as a child, never imagining she would one day be in command of her own warship. But here she was, standing on the bridge of the Ironheart, the weight of those same choices pressing on her shoulders. On Earth, President Elena Voss was not sleeping. The lights in her office burned through the night as she read reports from across the colonies. Some governors were urging surrender, fearing the destruction the Council's fleets could bring. Others demanded immediate action, calling for a united military strike before the aliens could fully mobilize. Every message reminded her of the stakes. Humanity's colonies were spread thin across space, scattered settlements on moons, mining, outposts on asteroids, fragile habitats on distant planets. A single Council fleet could wipe out a colony in hours. But Voss also knew something the Council did not fully understand: humanity's ability to adapt quickly. In every war of the past, it had been their unpredictability that turned the tide. She intended to use that again. In a secure underground facility below the Andes Mountains, a team of scientists worked without pause on a project known only as Iron Sky. Even most of the assembly had no idea what it was. The corridors were lined with armed guards. Engineers whispered over blueprints that flickered with holographic light. Some of the designs looked like weapons, others like experimental engines, but none of them had labels. Captain Mara received her orders through encrypted channels. She was to begin quiet preparations, moving her crew into readiness, stocking supplies and running combat drills under the cover of routine patrols. Her ship's communication logs were wiped every 12 hours. Even her officers knew only fragments of the plan. Meanwhile, the Council sent its second message. This one was not broadcast in the Grand Hall, but transmitted directly to the President's secure channel. It showed the destruction of Vega Colony, one of humanity's smallest outposts. The footage was brutal. Alien warships surrounded the settlement, their weapons flashing. Buildings turned to fire and ash. The sky went black with smoke. There were no survivors. The message that followed was short. 7 days is now 5. The images leaked before the government could contain them. Across Earth and the colonies, rage replaced fear. The death of Vega Colony became a rallying cry. People painted its name on banners, walls, and starships. Old veterans came out of retirement. Factories shifted overnight from making civilian goods to building weapons and armor. Even smugglers and pirates offered their ships for the cause, not out of loyalty to the government, but because they knew that if humanity fell, there would be no place left for them either. Captain Mara watched the footage of Vega Colony only once. She shut it off before it could play again. Her crew was already restless, whispering about the rumors. She gathered them in the mess hall and looked each of them in the eye. "You've all heard the stories," she said. "Some of you believe them, some of you don't. But I'll tell you this. The Council thinks they can break us. They think they can scare us into kneeling. They are wrong. We will not kneel. Not now. Not ever." The room was silent for a heartbeat, and then the sound of fists hitting tables filled the air. The crew's voices rose together in a single, defiant cheer. Somewhere in the dark between the stars, the Council's fleets were already moving into position. But humanity was moving too, quietly, quickly, with the fire of defiance burning in every heart. The days ahead would be bloody. But as history had shown, humanity had never been the kind to bow its head for long. The Council's next move came faster than anyone on Earth expected. The great alien fleets, painted in the black and gold colors of the Council's authority, appeared on the edges of human-controlled space. Their arrival was no quiet warning. It was a display of power meant to crush any thought of resistance before it began. Dozens of massive warships hovered in formation, their hulls glowing with energy. Smaller attack craft moved between them like sharks circling prey. Without a word of negotiation, they struck. This time, their target was no small colony hidden in a remote sector. They chose Callisto Station, one of humanity's most important trade hubs in Jupiter's orbit. The attack was broadcast live across the galaxy, just as the Council intended. Ships that had docked for resupply were torn apart in seconds. The station's defensive turrets fired desperately but were overwhelmed. Within minutes, fire and debris rained into Jupiter's storms. The message was clear. This was what would happen to every human world if Earth refused to kneel. In the aftermath, the Council transmitted their new terms. The voice of the speaker filled the skies once more, cold and without emotion. "Humanity, your time is over. You have 4 days to submit. Tribute will be doubled. Your fleets will surrender at once. Fail to obey, and your homeworld will burn." On Earth, the United Assembly met in emergency session. The air inside was thick with anger and fear. Several governors demanded immediate surrender, claiming that survival was better than destruction. Others slammed their hands on the table, calling for war even if it meant extinction. President Elena Voss listened to every voice, her eyes calm but unreadable. She understood the weight of the choice. Surrender would mean humanity's spirit was broken forever. But war could mean the end of everything they had built. Across the colonies, reactions were just as divided. In the domed cities of Mars, militia groups began to gather weapons. On the far mining worlds, workers swore to fight even if no one gave the order. But in the deep city tunnels of Venus Station, leaders spoke quietly about hiding, hoping the storm would pass them by. Captain Mara and the crew of the Ironheart received their orders that night. The message came through a secure channel, its words brief but heavy with meaning. Begin Operation Veil. Proceed to Sector 9. Avoid detection. Mara understood instantly. This was the first step toward open defiance. Her ship would vanish into the dark, preparing for something the Council would not expect. But her crew did not yet know the full plan. She kept it from them, knowing that the fewer who understood, the safer they all were. Meanwhile, the Council's fleets spread further into human space. They occupied smaller trade routes, intercepting ships and forcing them to surrender. Those who resisted were destroyed on the spot. Every act was broadcast to the galaxy, not because it was necessary, but because the Council wanted every race to see humanity's humiliation before it happened. Yet instead of crushing human will, these acts had the opposite effect. In the streets of Earth's megacities, thousands marched carrying banners that read, "Never kneel." On the colony moons, miners carved the words into the stone walls of their tunnels. In underground networks, smugglers began transporting weapons to resistance groups. What the Council did not understand was that fear could only go so far before it turned into rage. In the shadows of the Andes facility, President Voss met with her top generals. Holographic displays showed the spread of the Council's fleets, each red marker creeping closer to Earth. "They want us afraid," Voss said quietly. "But they forget what fear does to us. It makes us dangerous." Plans for the Iron Sky. Project accelerated. Shipyards that had once built cargo haulers now worked day and night to produce warships with designs unlike anything in human history. Weapons were tested in remote asteroid belts, far from the Council's spies. Even old derelict ships, long abandoned in orbital graveyards, were hauled back into service. Captain Mara's journey to Sector 9 was not without risk. Twice, her ship had to go dark to avoid Council patrols. Once they passed so close to an enemy cruiser that the crew could see the alien gun turrets turning in the void. Each time, Mara kept her face steady, her voice calm, knowing that panic would only kill them faster. When they finally reached the sector, they found a hidden station deep within a debris field, a secret base known only to a handful of human commanders. Inside, crews worked on something massive, its shape hidden beneath scaffolding and shadows. Mara did not ask what it was. She knew enough to understand that this was humanity's answer to the Council's ultimatum. Back on Earth, the Council's deadline loomed closer. The alien fleets now sat only days away from striking range of the homeworld. Messages poured in from alien species across the galaxy, some mocking humanity, others quietly wishing them luck but unwilling to intervene. Humanity stood alone. And yet, in that isolation, something ancient stirred. The same stubborn will that had carried them through every war in their history. In the final hours before the Council expected Earth's reply, President Voss recorded a message. Her advisors urged caution, but she ignored them. She spoke simply, her words measured but unflinching. "To the Council," she began, "you demand our submission. You demand our freedom. You demand our future. Our answer is this: we do not kneel." The message was sent not just to the Council, but to every listening station in the galaxy. It was short, clear, and impossible to misunderstand. Somewhere on the edge of human space, Captain Mara received the transmission and smiled grimly. The time for words was over. The war had begun. The moment President Voss's message reached the galaxy, everything changed. Across human space, the words, "We do not kneel," spread faster than light, carried by smugglers, traders, and even intercepted by alien ears. The Council's fleets, expecting hesitation and surrender, instead saw humanity harden like steel. Shipyards lit up the night skies above Earth and Mars, their forges running without pause. Cargo freighters were stripped of civilian modules and refitted with armor plates and missile launchers. Old warships pulled from orbital graveyards were patched, repaired, and armed with weapons long thought obsolete. In the hidden stations of the asteroid belts, engineers worked on prototypes that no alien fleet had ever faced before. The Iron Sky project was at the heart of it all, and though most people didn't know what it was, rumors whispered of a weapon that could change the war entirely. Captain Mara and the Ironheart had made the debris field base their new home. The station was crowded with crews from a dozen ships, each one preparing for missions that had not yet been revealed. Supplies were stacked in narrow corridors, and the air smelled of metal, oil, and recycled oxygen. Every day, new ships arrived under strict communications silence, hiding from the Council's scanners. Mara's crew trained without rest. Pilots drilled precision maneuvers through asteroid fields. Engineers practiced emergency repairs in simulated battle damage. Gunners fired at drone targets launched deep into the void. The mood was tense but focused. Everyone understood that their lives now depended on how well they could work together when the shooting started. Far from the hidden base, the Council continued to tighten its hold. Patrol fleets blocked major jump lanes. Merchant ships carrying food and medicine to human colonies were intercepted, their cargo seized. In some places, the Council destroyed shipments outright, hoping to starve resistance into submission. These acts, instead of breaking humanity's will, only deepened the rage in the hearts of its people. Civilians volunteered for service in numbers the military had never seen. Farmers left their fields to crew freighters converted into troop carriers. Miners from the frozen moons of Neptune loaded explosives into their cargo holds, ready to ram enemy ships if needed. Even those with no military skills found ways to contribute. Mechanics repaired damaged fighters. Programmers worked on encryption to shield communications, and medics stocked supplies for the wounded they knew would soon come. In the shadows of the Andes facility, Iron Sky neared completion. It was larger than any warship humanity had ever built, a dark giant that seemed to drink in the light around it. Few outside the highest levels of command knew what it could do, but those who had seen it spoke of its power in hushed voices. President Voss visited the site in secret, walking the length of the enormous hull as workers swarmed like ants over its surface. "Will it be ready?" she asked the chief engineer. "It will," he replied, "or humanity will fall." The Council was not blind to these movements. Their spies reported unusual shipyard activity and strange energy readings from hidden sectors. To counter this, they increased patrols and dispatched elite infiltration teams. Several human resistance cells vanished overnight, their members captured or killed. But in most cases, the Council's agents failed to return. Humanity had learned to fight in the shadows just as well as in the open. On the Ironheart, Mara received her first real mission orders since arriving at the base. She was to lead a small fleet on a deep strike into Council territory, not to attack directly, but to gather intelligence on their fleet movements and locate weak points in their supply lines. It was dangerous work. If caught, there would be no rescue, no negotiation. Still, she accepted without hesitation. "We've been on defense long enough," she told her crew. "It's time to take the fight to them, even if it's just in the shadows for now." The fleet launched under the cover of drifting asteroids, their engines cold until they were beyond the range of enemy sensors. Navigation was tricky. One wrong jump, and they could emerge in the middle of a Council armada. Days passed in tense silence as they crept deeper into enemy space. They found what they were looking for in the Trion sector, a massive Council logistics hub, dozens of cargo haulers surrounded by lightly armed escorts. It was the beating heart of the supply lines feeding the fleets at the human front. Mara's instincts screamed to strike immediately, but she knew the mission was reconnaissance. She marked every detail, every patrol route, every weakness in their defenses before slipping back into the void. The data she returned with was worth more than gold. It would allow human forces to plan targeted strikes that could cripple the Council's war effort. Back on Earth, the information fueled a new wave of planning. Coordinated sabotage missions were approved. Resistance cells received orders to disrupt communications, disable jump gates, and sow confusion in occupied sectors. The Council began to feel the first sting of humanity's defiance, small wounds that bled resources and time. But time was the one thing humanity had the least of. The Council's main armada was now less than 2 weeks from Earth. Its sheer size dwarfed anything humanity could put in the field. Even with every ship they had, even with Iron Sky completed, it would be a battle fought at impossible odds. Yet the gathering storm was no longer just about numbers. It was about will. For every ship the Council destroyed, 2 more were repaired or rebuilt. For every fighter pilot lost, 3 more stepped forward to take their place. Humanity was not simply preparing for war. It was transforming itself into a species that would never again be threatened with submission. And in the cold black between the stars, Captain Mara watched the enemy's movements on her tactical screens and thought of the generations before her who had faced their own invaders and tyrants. She knew the storm was coming, and she would be at its heart. The waiting ended in the dead silence of deep space. For weeks, the Ironheart and the hidden human fleet had moved like shadows between asteroid belts and derelict stations, gathering strength and information. The Council believed humanity was still scrambling to defend its homeworld, still trapped in fear and disorganization. They were wrong. In the war room of the hidden base, the final plan was laid out. The target was not a battleship, not a frontline stronghold, but the Council's main communications hub in the Relora sector, a massive space station that linked their fleets, coordinated attacks, and relayed orders across half the galaxy. Without it, the alien armada would be blinded, their movements slowed, their coordination broken. The Council considered it untouchable. That arrogance would be their mistake. Captain Mara studied the tactical display with the focus of a predator, watching its prey. The Ironheart would lead 3 other ships, the Vengeance, the Starfire, and the Nightfall, all modified for speed and stealth. They would slip past the outer patrols, plant a series of pulse charges along the station's core relays, and vanish before the Council understood what had happened. Failure was not an option. The fleet departed under a false sensor signature, their engines tuned to mimic the readings of harmless cargo ships. They drifted along mining routes and through debris fields, silent and patient. Twice they passed, close to alien patrols, holding their breath as scanners swept the void. Mara kept her eyes on the displays, every muscle tense. Finally, the target came into view. A massive ring-shaped station, its surface alive with glowing antenna arrays and docking arms. Dozens of smaller ships moved around it, carrying supplies, personnel, and data cores. The operation began without a single shot. The Nightfall and Starfire broke away, slipping into the dark side of the station's orbit where sensor coverage was weakest. The Vengeance moved into position near a maintenance bay, launching drones disguised as repair units. The Ironheart drifted closer, shields powered down to appear harmless. Mara's voice was calm but clipped as she gave the order. "Deploy charges!" The first explosive was planted by a drone clamping onto the base of a comms array. The second was hidden inside a supply container offloaded by the Vengeance's false transponder codes. The third was attached directly to the central relay hub by a stealth team in maneuver suits, their movements practiced and precise. All the while, alien technicians continued their work, unaware that death was crawling over their station like invisible insects. When the final charge was armed, Mara waited for the signal from all ships. It came in 3 sharp clicks over the comm. "All units, clear the zone," she ordered. Engines flared to life, and the human ships began to pull away, sliding back into the debris field. For a moment, it seemed the mission was complete without a hitch. Then an alarm blared across the Ironheart's bridge. A patrol corvette had altered course, scanning the debris field directly ahead. "They've spotted our burn trail," one of the officers shouted. Mara's jaw tightened. "Detonate, now!" The void lit up in a blinding flash. One by one, the charges ignited, sending massive shock waves through the station's core. Antennas shattered, docking arms tore free, and entire sections of the station broke apart as fire and debris spiraled into space. The communications hub was gone in seconds, its destruction captured on a dozen surveillance feeds before the flames cut them to static. The alien patrol corvette tried to intercept, but the Ironheart and her fleet were already gone, vanishing into a pre-planned jump corridor. Hours later, chaos rippled through the Council's networks. Fleet commands went unanswered, patrols lost contact with their superiors, and military operations stalled. The Armada approaching Earth was forced to slow, its movements no longer perfectly timed. On human worlds, the news of the strike spread like wildfire. For the first time since the Council's ultimatum, people felt the rush of hope. They had struck back and won. On Earth, President Voss stood before the assembly with the footage playing behind her. "Let this be the first message to the Council," she said. "We are not prey. We are hunters." The Council's response was swift and furious. Entire sectors went into lockdown. Patrols doubled, and bounties were placed on every known human ship operating outside its borders. Propaganda broadcasts painted humanity as reckless criminals who threatened galactic stability. But beneath their bluster, the Council's leaders were rattled. They had underestimated the humans' reach and cunning, and now they would have to fight a war on an enemy's terms, something they had not done in centuries. In the hidden asteroid base, Captain Mara debriefed her crew. They were tired, bruised, but alive. The operation had been dangerous, but the success had ignited a fire in every one of them. For the first time, they felt the enemy could bleed. That night, the base was alive with quiet celebrations, not loud enough to risk detection, but filled with the rare sound of laughter. Mara allowed herself a small smile as she walked through the corridors. She knew this was just the beginning. The Council would strike back harder than ever, and the cost of war was only beginning to be paid. But humanity had taken the first step from survival into true resistance. The first strike had not just crippled the Council's fleets. It had sent a message that would echo across the stars. The Council's retaliation came like a storm tearing through the void. Within days of the first strike, their fleets regrouped, driven by a fury that turned every commander into a predator. They no longer moved with the measured, calculated pace of an unbeatable empire. Now, they hunted. The first clash came in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Human scouts detected a Council strike group advancing through the rocks, using the belt for cover. It was a trap meant to catch any fleeing resistance ships. But Captain Mara saw the opportunity before her. She ordered the Ironheart and 2 escort frigates, the Valkyrie and the Horizon, to cut them off. The battle began in silence. Both sides maneuvered slowly, weaving between massive asteroids that spun in the darkness. Then a flash of light erupted as the Horizon opened fire, its railguns punching through the shields of an alien destroyer. The Council's response was immediate and brutal. Plasma cannons tore through nearby asteroids, sending molten rock spiraling through space. The Ironheart darted between cover, launching missile volleys that tracked their targets through the shifting debris. Human pilots fought like wolves, striking fast, vanishing, then striking again from a different angle. The Council ships were larger and stronger, but they struggled against the unpredictable human tactics. The asteroids became both shield and weapon. At Mara's command, mining charges buried in the rocks were detonated, sending massive fragments smashing into the alien formation. One Council cruiser was split in two, its pieces spinning into the void, but the cost was heavy. The Valkyrie took a direct hit to its engines, flames and atmosphere venting into space before it limped behind cover. The horizon was nearly torn apart before its captain rammed an enemy corvette, sacrificing his ship to destroy the alien vessel. As the last of the enemy strike group broke apart, Mara's crew let out a ragged cheer. They had survived another fight. And more importantly, they had taken the fight to the enemy once again. News of the battle spread fast. Human colonies lit up their skies with signal flares, a tradition from the old wars on Earth to honor victories. But the celebrations were short-lived. The Council was far from beaten. 2 weeks later, they unleashed their full strength in the Vega Corridor, the main route between the outer colonies and Earth. Dozens of their warships advanced in a wall of firepower. This time, they didn't care about subtlety or tactics. They wanted to crush humanity's defenses in one decisive blow. Earth's high command scrambled every available ship. Civilian freighters were fitted with weapons, mining barges were armored with steel plating, and even research vessels were pressed into service. The resulting fleet was a patchwork of designs and capabilities, a mix of polished warships and barely functional gun platforms. Captain Mara found herself in command of a strike group tasked with flanking the enemy line. Her orders were clear: disrupt their advance long enough for the main fleet to evacuate key colonies in the corridor. The battle that followed was chaos. Space lit up with the constant flare of weapons fire, missile trails arcing between ships like streaks of burning metal. Alien fighters swarmed like insects, weaving between human ships to target engines and weapon systems. The Ironheart's shields flared under repeated hits, the crew fighting to keep systems online. Mara's voice was steady over the comms, giving crisp orders as if the battle were a training drill. Target the lead destroyer. Ignore the rest until it's down. All ships, focus fire. A coordinated volley from her group punched through the destroyer's reactor, tearing it apart in a bloom of white fire. The Council formation faltered for just a moment, but in war, a moment was all that was needed. Human ships surged forward, pressing the advantage. Still, the cost was brutal. The starboard wing of the Ironheart was scorched and venting air. The escort ship Dauntless took 3 direct hits before breaking apart. Mara had no time to mourn. Every second was a fight for survival. Hours passed before the Council finally began to withdraw, their losses heavier than they had anticipated. Humanity had held the corridor, but at a terrible price. Wreckage drifted in the silence of space, shattered hulls, floating debris, and the cold bodies of those who had given everything. The victory was hollow, yet it sent a clear message. Humanity could face the Council in open battle and survive. Back on Earth, President Voss used the moment to rally the population. Her speech was broadcast to every world, every station, every outpost. "The war has begun," she said, her voice unshaken. "The Council thought they could break us with fear. They thought they could force us to our knees. But every ship they destroy, every life they take, only strengthens our resolve. We are still here. We will not kneel, and we will win." In the weeks that followed, skirmishes erupted across the galaxy. Small human strike teams ambushed supply convoys. Sabotage. Units disabled Council infrastructure, and colonies fortified their defenses. The war had truly ignited, and for the first time, the Council was forced to divide its attention between dozens of unpredictable threats. Captain Mara knew this was only the opening chapter. The Council would adapt. They always did. But humanity had proven something vital. They could match the Council's power with their own cunning and determination. As the Ironheart limped back to the hidden base for repairs, Mara stood on the observation deck, staring at the stars. Each point of light was a potential battlefield. each shadow a place where the next fight could begin. The war was far from over, but humanity had taken its place among the stars as a force to be feared. And somewhere, deep within the Council's war rooms, alien leaders began to speak of humans not as prey, but as a problem they could no longer ignore. The Council was angry, but anger could make even the most disciplined force careless. After the battles in the Vega corridor, they wanted revenge, not strategy. Their scouts had tracked fragments of human fleet activity near the Helix Expanse, a vast and dangerous asteroid field that stretched for millions of kilometers. To the Council, it looked like a perfect opportunity to corner and destroy a significant human force. They assembled a powerful strike fleet of heavy cruisers, destroyers, and fighter carriers, certain that humanity had nowhere to run inside the shifting maze of rocks and debris. What they did not know was that the Helix Expanse was not a refuge for human ships. It was a killing ground prepared in secret for weeks. Captain Mara and the Ironheart had been stationed in the Expanse with a fleet of smaller, agile warships, each one hidden deep among the asteroids. Mining teams had rigged hundreds of the largest rocks with explosives set to detonate in precise sequences. The plan was simple but deadly. Lure the Council fleet deep inside, trap them between two converging asteroid walls, and destroy them in a coordinated barrage before they could escape. The bait was a decoy convoy of transport ships, broadcasting fake distress calls about being pursued by Council raiders. The moment the signal went out, Council sensors picked it up, and their fleet moved in without hesitation. From the bridge of the Ironheart, Mara watched the enemy advance through the field. Their formation was tight, their shields up, but their movement was slow as they weaved around the larger asteroids. The trap was closing, but it required perfect timing. One wrong move, and the Council could realize the danger and retreat. "Hold positions," Mara ordered, her eyes fixed on the tactical map. "Not yet. Let them come deeper." Minutes felt like hours as the alien ships pushed further into the Expanse. The larger rocks blotted out most of the surrounding space, creating narrow channels that funneled the enemy deeper toward the kill zone. On the flanks, human stealth ships powered up their engines, ready to spring the trap. When the last Council cruiser crossed the invisible threshold, Mara gave the signal. "Now!" The void exploded with light. Mines hidden on the surface of the asteroids erupted, sending massive shards of rock and molten debris into the enemy formation. Council ships swerved desperately, colliding with one another as their shields flared under the impact. At the same time, human ships emerged from hiding, firing everything they had. Torpedoes streaked through the chaos, railguns shredded unshielded hulls, and fighter wings dove into the confusion to pick off stragglers. One Council destroyer tried to break through the right flank, but a hidden human gun platform blasted it into a ball of fire. The enemy fleet was trapped, its own size working against it. The narrow asteroid channels prevented them from turning quickly, forcing their ships into tight bottlenecks where they were easy targets. Mara's voice was calm but urgent over the comms. "Keep the pressure on. Don't give them space to regroup." Her fleet obeyed, striking in coordinated waves. Every time the Council tried to form a defensive line, a fresh wave of explosions shattered it. The battlefield became a graveyard of burning wrecks and drifting bodies. But the Council was not without teeth. One of their heavy cruisers locked onto the Ironheart and unleashed a barrage that tore through its port-side shielding. Warning klaxons filled the bridge as systems failed and sparks rained from overhead conduits. "Divert all power to shields," Mara ordered, refusing to back down. The Ironheart returned fire with everything it had, and with support from the Valkyrie, the cruiser was finally silenced in a burst of light. After nearly an hour of relentless fighting, the Council fleet began to break. Their surviving ships abandoned the fight, trying to force their way back through the entry point. But Mara had anticipated this. The exit route had been mined as well, and the first cruiser that tried to escape triggered a chain of detonations that blocked the path with a wall of tumbling debris. The remaining alien ships were picked off one by one until the only sounds. In the comms were the steady breaths of human crews and the crackle of burning wreckage in the void. When the last Council vessel was gone, silence returned to the Helix expanse. The battle had been a decisive victory, one of the largest the humans had achieved since the war began. More than half of the Council's strike force lay in pieces, and the psychological blow was as devastating as the tactical loss. Back on Earth, the news sent waves of celebration across every city and colony. People lit beacons on rooftops, and resistance groups across alien-controlled worlds sent encrypted messages of support. Humanity had not only survived another major confrontation, but had turned one of the galaxy's most feared fleets into rubble. In the Council's war chambers, however, the mood was grim. The speaker demanded answers from his commanders. How had a primitive race predicted their movements so precisely? How had they transformed a natural hazard into a battlefield advantage? For the first time, the Council began to consider that they were not simply fighting an upstart species. They were facing a cunning and resourceful enemy capable of reshaping the war itself. As the Ironheart limped back to the hidden base for repairs, Captain Mara stood in the observation deck, her gaze on the distant stars. She knew the war was far from over. The Council still had overwhelming numbers, resources, and technology. But now they also had something else. Doubt. And in war, doubt could be as dangerous as any weapon. Mara allowed herself a thin smile. The trap had worked, and the galaxy had taken notice. Humanity was no longer just resisting. They were winning battles on their own terms, and the Council, for all its power, would now have to fight a war it no longer completely understood. The Helix Expanse victory had shaken the galaxy, but it also forced the Council into a decision they had been avoiding. In their vast arsenal was a weapon so devastating that it was forbidden by their own war codes. The Starbreaker, a colossal siege platform capable of collapsing a star into itself, wiping out everything in the surrounding system. The Council had never used it against another advanced species, fearing the political backlash from their allies, but against humanity, who had no representation or allies in the Galactic Assembly, there was no such restraint. Intelligence reports reached Earth's High Command within days. The Council was mobilizing the Starbreaker toward Epsilon Prime, one of humanity's most critical colonies and a key hub for fleet logistics. If Epsilon Prime fell, not only would millions die, but the human war effort would lose its ability to supply distant fleets. President Voss convened an emergency session. Every surviving fleet commander attended, including Captain Mara, whose reputation had grown to near-mythic status. The decision was unanimous. They could not allow the Starbreaker to fire. It had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. The plan was reckless, even suicidal. The Starbreaker was guarded by an escort fleet larger than anything humanity had faced. Its hull was layered with shield generators powerful enough to withstand sustained orbital bombardment. Direct attack was impossible. Instead, Mara proposed an infiltration strike. A small task force would slip through the escort perimeter under cover of a massive diversionary assault, board the Starbreaker, and destroy it from the inside. The operation was code-named Iron Dawn. Preparations began immediately. Ships were stripped of anything non-essential to make room for extra armor, munitions, and shielding. Volunteers were called for the boarding teams, and every slot was filled within hours. Some were veterans from earlier battles, others were civilians who had lost everything and wanted to strike back. The day of the mission arrived under a cold, silent sky. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Epsilon system, facing the largest Council force they had ever seen. Alien warships formed a defensive sphere around the Starbreaker, which hung in the void like a mechanical god. its massive energy arrays already glowing as they charged. At Mara's command, the diversion began. Hundreds of human ships surged forward, weapons blazing, drawing the Council's escorts into a furious battle. The void filled with explosions, missile trails, and the constant flare of shield impacts. Meanwhile, the Ironheart and a handful of stealth frigates slipped through the chaos, riding the shadows of asteroid fragments toward the Starbreaker. They were nearly in range when a Council patrol corvette spotted them. There was no time for subtlety. "Full speed ahead," Mara ordered. "All weapons! Fire at will!" The Ironheart's guns roared, shredding the corvette before it could broadcast a full warning, but now the element of surprise was gone. Council ships began peeling away from the main battle to intercept. The Ironheart took hit after hit as it closed the distance, its shields flaring bright before finally collapsing. Hull plating buckled and damage reports poured in, but the ship held together long enough to reach the Starbreaker's docking ring. Boarding clamps engaged with a metallic groan, and Mara led the first wave of Marines into the station's dim, alien-lit corridors. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the distant roar of the battle outside. Council soldiers poured in to repel them, their armor gleaming under the cold lights. The fighting was brutal and close quarters, energy bolts and rifle fire echoing through the metal halls. The boarding team advanced step by step, pushing toward the Starbreaker's core reactor. Every junction was defended, every bulkhead reinforced, but the humans fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction. Mara herself took down a towering alien commander with a single precise shot to its exposed neck joint, then pressed, forward without pause. Minutes felt like hours, and casualties mounted, but finally they reached the reactor chamber, a massive sphere of pulsing energy suspended in a web of alien technology. The plan was simple: overload the containment field and trigger a chain reaction that would tear the Starbreaker apart. Engineers scrambled to plant charges while the rest of the team held the doorway against wave after wave of defenders. The chamber shook violently as the countdown began. "Charges set," the lead engineer shouted. "We've got 60 seconds to get clear." But there would be no getting clear. The Ironheart was too damaged to escape in time, and the Council fleet was already closing in. Mara looked around at her team, saw the understanding in their eyes, and gave a single nod. They all knew what had to be done. "Transmit to the fleet," she said. "Tell them the Starbreaker is finished, and tell them we held the line." The last transmission went out just as the first explosions ripped through the reactor housing. Light brighter than 1,000 suns filled the chamber, swallowing everything. From outside, the human fleet saw the impossible. The Starbreaker, collapsing inward, its enormous frame twisting and tearing apart before vanishing in a burst of white fire. The shock wave tore through the Council's formation, disabling dozens of ships and forcing the rest to scatter. The cost was terrible, but the mission had succeeded. Epsilon Prime was safe. Across human space, the name Iron Dawn became a legend. Songs were written, monuments planned, and in every dark corner of the galaxy where resistance still fought, the story of the Ironheart's last stand spread like wildfire. Even within the Council, whispers began to circulate that perhaps humanity could not be broken, no matter the weapon brought against them. And somewhere, in the vast cold of space, Captain Mara's final words hung in the silence, a promise and a warning both. Humanity would never kneel. The destruction of the Starbreaker sent shockwaves far beyond the Epsilon system. Across the galaxy, species under Council rule began to question the invincibility of their overlords. For centuries, the Council had ruled with a mixture of fear and inevitability, crushing rebellions before they began. But the death of their ultimate weapon at the hands of a so-called primitive race had cracked the foundation of that fear. Inside the grand halls of the Council's central spire, debates raged. Some member species demanded harsher retaliation, insisting that humanity be erased completely before their defiance inspired others. Others, however, began to question the cost of the war. The human conflict had already consumed vast resources and countless ships, and for the first time in generations, the Council's fleets were stretched thin. The Speaker tried to maintain unity, but dissent was growing. Secretly, some Council worlds began withdrawing ships from the front to protect their own borders, fearing that humanity's allies, if they had any, might soon emerge from the shadows. While the Council faltered, humanity moved with determination. President Voss and the High Command saw the moment for what it was, an opening to shift from defense to offense. For years, humans had fought from the shadows, picking battles, carefully, avoiding direct confrontation when possible. Now, for the first time, they had the chance to take the fight into enemy territory. A series of rapid strikes was planned against lightly defended Council outposts in the outer sectors. These targets were not chosen for their strategic value alone, but for their symbolic importance. Each one was a station or colony that had been taken from another species and repurposed by the Council, a reminder of their conquests. By liberating these worlds, humanity hoped to ignite rebellion across the galaxy. Command of the new offensive fell to Admiral Kalen, a hard-edged strategist who had fought alongside Mara in the early days of the war. The first target was the mining world of Dravak 4, a vital source of rare metals for the Council's shipyards. Intelligence suggested that the garrison was small and morale low. The attack began with precision. Human frigates emerged from hyperspace, in tight formation, their engines burning white as they dove toward the planet's orbital station. The defenders scrambled to respond, but Kalen's fleet moved with the efficiency of a blade through cloth. Within hours, the station was in human hands, and the mining facilities on the surface followed soon after. Instead of occupying the world, Kalen broadcast a message to its native inhabitants, the insectoid Dravaki, declaring their freedom and urging them to rise against the Council. The message was repeated in hundreds of languages and sent out across every frequency the humans could reach. Similar operations followed in quick succession. Outpost after outpost fell, not because the human fleet could hold them indefinitely, but because each victory planted seeds of resistance. Alien populations who had endured centuries of oppression began sabotaging Council supply lines, hiding human strike teams, and spreading rumors of the Council's weakness. In the shadows, human intelligence operatives worked tirelessly to fan these flames, forging alliances with underground movements and supplying them with weapons and training. But the Council was not blind. Though their unity was fractured, they still possessed immense power. The Speaker ordered the formation of a new coalition fleet drawn from loyal member species, a massive force intended to sweep through the contested zones and crush the rebellion before it could spread. This fleet, known as the Purge Armada, began its march toward the liberated worlds, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. The humans knew they could not face it head-on, so they turned once more to asymmetric warfare. Using intelligence gathered from defectors, Admiral Kalen laid a trap. In the Rethari Nebula, a dense cloud of charged particles that interfered with targeting systems. The plan was to lure the Purge Armada inside, disrupt their formation, and then strike their command ships before they could reorganize. The bait was a convoy of supply vessels broadcasting fake distress signals, and the Purge Armada took it, without hesitation. As the massive alien fleet entered the nebula, their sensors flickered, their targeting systems scrambled by the thick ionized gases. That was when the human fleet emerged from hiding, launching a coordinated assault from multiple vectors. Chaos erupted. The Council's larger ships struggled to bring their guns to bear in the swirling haze, while smaller, more agile human vessels darted between them, striking weak points and retreating before they could be hit. Kalen's forces targeted the command carriers first, knowing that without coordination, the Armada would collapse into disorder. One by one, the alien flagships were crippled or destroyed, and the remaining vessels scattered, their formation shattered. The battle was not without cost. Several human ships were lost and casualties ran high, but the victory sent another clear message to the galaxy. The Council could be beaten, even when they brought their full strength to bear. Across dozens of worlds, resistance movements erupted into open revolt. Council garrisons found themselves under siege from within and without. Some member species began negotiating secretly with human envoys, offering supplies or safe passage in exchange for promises of independence after the war. The Speaker, desperate to reassert control, ordered mass purges of suspected collaborators, but this only fueled further unrest. For the first time in living memory, the Council's grip on the galaxy was slipping. On Earth, celebrations were tempered with the knowledge that the war was far from over. President Voss addressed the people, speaking not only to humans, but to every species listening in the shadows. "We fight not just for our survival," she said, "but for a galaxy free from tyranny. We will not stop, we will not kneel, and we will not be alone." In the hidden war rooms of the human fleet, plans were already forming for the next phase, a strike at the very heart of the Council's power. The tide had truly turned, but the final storm was still to come. The galaxy stood on the edge of a storm. After the destruction of the Starbreaker and the defeat of the Purge Armada, the Council's once unshakable authority had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. Rebellions burned across dozens of worlds, supply lines were in ruins, and trust between member species had collapsed into suspicion and betrayal. Yet the Council still held its capital world, Aurelius Prime, a fortress planet at the heart of the galaxy. From its surface rose the Spire of Command, a colossal structure of black alloy and shimmering energy fields, where the Speaker and the remaining Council members clung to power. To shatter the Council completely, humanity would have to strike here, in the very seat of their enemy's rule. The operation was codenamed Final Dawn. Every surviving human fleet was called to assemble, along with ships from newly liberated worlds whose people had chosen to join the fight. The combined force was unlike anything humanity had fielded before, an alliance born not of trust, but of shared defiance. Admiral Kalen took supreme command, his voice steady as he outlined the plan. The defenses of Aurelius Prime were formidable, layered planetary shields, orbital defense rings, and an armada of loyalist warships. A direct assault would be suicide. Instead, Kalen proposed a two-pronged strategy. The main fleet would engage the loyalist armada head-on to draw their fire, while an infiltration team slipped past the defenses to disable the planetary shield generators. Once the shields fell, the fleet could bombard the spire directly. Leading the infiltration was Commander Rhea Solis, a former covert operative whose missions had taken her deep into Council territory before the war. Her team of specialists included soldiers, engineers, and alien allies familiar with Aurelius Prime's architecture. Their insertion vessel was a stealth corvette, the Silent Dagger, designed to evade detection even under heavy scans. The battle began on the outer edge of the Aurelius system. Human and allied ships emerged from hyperspace in disciplined waves, their engines blazing as they slammed into the Council's defensive line. The void erupted into chaos, beams of energy and missile trails streaking through the darkness. Kalen's flagship, the Resolute, led the charge, its heavy guns tearing into the enemy's capital ships. The Loyalists fought with desperation, knowing that defeat here would mean the end of the Council itself. While the fleets clashed, the Silent Dagger slipped into the shadow of an asteroid and coasted silently toward the planet. Inside, Rhea's team moved with quiet focus, each member knowing that discovery would mean certain death. As they reached the atmosphere, the Corvette deployed drop pods, each one carrying 2 operatives. They fell like meteors through the skies of Aurelius Prime, landing in the outskirts of the shield complex. The facility was a sprawling maze of towers, conduits, and energy relays, guarded by elite soldiers from multiple Council species. Using stolen access codes and cloaking devices, the team infiltrated the perimeter, moving from shadow to shadow, Patrols passed within meters of them, unaware of the danger closing in. In orbit, the battle grew fiercer. The Resolute took hit after hit, its shields flickering under the relentless fire of the Loyalist dreadnoughts. Kalen refused to retreat. "Hold the line," he ordered. "Every second we buy them brings us closer to victory." On the surface, Rhea's team reached the control nexus of the shield generator. The structure pulsed with raw power, the hum of energy vibrating through the floor. Alien technicians worked at consoles, unaware until the humans and their allies struck. The fight was quick and brutal. Blades and rifles flashed in the confined space as the team cut down the defenders. Engineers moved in, planting charges along the main conduits. As the last charge was armed, Rhea triggered her comm. "Kalen, shields will be down in 60 seconds. Make it count." In orbit, Kalen seized the moment. "All ships, focus fire. On the spire!" The planetary shields flared once, then collapsed under the combined impact of the detonations. From space, the towers of Aurelius Prime lay exposed. The Allied fleet unleashed a storm of firepower. Railgun slugs and plasma lances tore through the upper levels of the spire, sending chunks of black alloy tumbling into the burning city below. Inside the spire, the Speaker and the surviving council members watched their power crumble in real time. Some called for evacuation, others for surrender. The Speaker refused both, swearing that the council would never bow to human rule. His words were cut short as a railgun slug punched through the chamber wall, obliterating the council table in a spray of fire and debris. On the surface, Rhea's team fought their way back to the Silent Dagger, pursued by waves of council soldiers. One by one, her team members fell, buying time for the others to escape. Rhea herself was the last aboard, wounded but unbroken. As the corvette lifted into the sky, she looked back at the burning world and felt the weight of history in that moment. The spire's collapse was visible even from orbit, a massive plume of smoke and fire rising from the heart of Aurelius Prime. With their leaders dead or scattered, the remaining Loyalist forces surrendered within hours. Across the galaxy, news of the Council's fall spread like wildfire. Chains of oppression that had lasted for centuries began to break as worlds declared independence. In human space, celebrations erupted, though they were tempered by the cost of victory. Billions had died, and countless worlds lay in ruins, but the war was finally over. In the ruins of the spire, Kalen and Rhea stood together, watching the dawn rise over Aurelius Prime. The air was still thick with smoke, but the light broke through, casting long shadows over the broken city. "It's over," Rhea said softly. Kalen shook his head. "No, this is just the beginning. Now we have to build something better." Humanity had not only survived, but had become a symbol of resistance for the entire galaxy. The legacy of their struggle would endure, a reminder that even the mightiest empire could fall if enough voices refused to kneel.